Do we need to start worrying about Daniel Jones's future availability? What about the offensive line? That and more coming your way next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm Patricia Trainer, your host at Patricia_Trainer on X, the social media site formerly known as Twitter, and at Patty Trainer, PATTITRAINA on Threads and Instagram, where I post videos, clips, audios, all kinds of cool stuff. Check it out. Follow if you are not already doing so. And please be sure to subscribe, like, and smash that little bell if you are watching us on YouTube. We would appreciate it. And I appreciate you making us your first listener today. If you watch on YouTube, your first watch of the day. All right, on today's Locked On Giants podcast, do we need to start worrying about Daniel Jones's future with this team? And we'll also talk about yet another offensive line combination, some movement on the offensive line done on Tuesday. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then finally, we'll close out with, should the Giants be sellers at the trade deadline, regardless of what happens these next two games? So that is our agenda for today's show. As always, thank you for listening. All right, let's talk about Daniel Jones. Now, not since Eli Manning have I seen a player that's been so polarizing as Daniel Jones. I mean, there are people that can't wait to get rid of him. There are people who say, he's been dealt an unfair hand. And then there are people that are somewhere in the middle with Daniel Jones. But I want to look at this more so from a human perspective here. Daniel Jones is dealing with a neck injury, as we all know. It is not the same neck injury that he had a couple years ago, in which it cost him the final 6 games of the season. Yet he was able to practice with that one. This one, he has not yet been able to practice. Now, as I record this, it's Tuesday night. We will see if he'll be able to practice this week, at least on a limited basis. But on his weekly appearance with the Up and Adams show with Kay Adams, Daniel sure didn't sound like he was making progress in the right direction. All right. He talked about, how on Sunday night, he talked to Melissa Stark, and he said how he has pain in the left side of his neck and it's kind of affecting his shoulder. Now, I don't profess to be a doctor, so I'm not going to try and diagnose him. From my own personal experience, though, since I have been dealing with a neck issue myself as a result of a pinched nerve, those suckers hurt, and they can literally render your arm or your leg, depending on, how they're pinched, they can render it useless. So I know for me, I've been going through, treatment to make mine better, and it's improving, but it's taken quite a bit. And again, I'm not saying that Daniel Jones has the exact same injury I have, but neck injuries can take a while to heal, and you don't want to mess around with them. You don't want to put, especially when it comes to a contact sport, you do not want to put a guy out on the field, especially behind an offensive line, which we'll talk about in a moment, that has been like human turnstiles. So, in listening to Daniel when he spoke to Kay Adams on his weekly spot, he didn't sound to me like a guy who had made enough progress to be able to potentially play on Sunday versus the Commanders. Now, when I say, is it time to be concerned about him, I'm not just talking in terms of football, because obviously that's his profession. Everybody should have a right to pursue the profession that they want to if they are given the opportunity. Where I tend to be concerned is from a human perspective. All right. This is a guy who's 26 years old. This is his second neck injury. Neck injuries are not something to mess around with, as I've said. So you got to wonder if he is potentially at risk that when he eventually does go back out there, if he goes back out there this year, and I don't know, what the status is there, is he at risk of doing something worse? Is something going on to where maybe this just isn't gonna be worth it anymore? Now, only Daniel Jones can make that decision, obviously, along with his doctors. He's young, but again, neck injuries, we saw what happened a few years ago with David Wilson and how a neck issue ended his career prematurely. So it does happen. Um, your concern, like I said, is for the individual because you don't want him going out there. God forbid he gets sacked and get hit the wrong way. And now all of a sudden you have bigger problems. So for me, speaking for myself, yes, I have concern about Daniel Jones as a human. I have concerns about, um, if maybe in his effort to show how tough he is, maybe he's like, well, I'll throw caution to the wind. That's his call. I get that. And I respect that. But, regardless of what you think of him as a quarterback, and again, I know there's people out there that don't like him. They just assume move on from him. I get that. And, even the Giants, the way they set up his contract, they can get out of that contract very easily, after next year if they want to, or if actually even before if they trade him. But you don't want to see an injury have to force anybody's hand. And that's potentially here what we are looking at with Daniel Jones. It's unfortunate because, from my perspective, there are things that Daniel Jones doesn't do well as a quarterback, still doesn't do well as a quarterback, making quick reads, processing quickly. But then again, there are things that we don't know, especially behind this offensive line, with this offense having gravitated to more of a, trying to become more of a track type of offense, which it hasn't really been able to do. But they tried to jump ahead in the in year 2 of the system to be, to do a little bit more. We may never know if Daniel Jones could have handled it because this offensive line's not giving him a chance. Now he's got the injury, and who knows how much longer he's going to be out. Maybe he's back this week. I doubt it right now. I mean, if you were to put me on the spot, I would say I don't expect him for Sunday's game, but we'll see. And again, from a human perspective, I hope the injury resolves itself. He's able to get back out there and figure out a way so that if he gets hit again, and we know he will because that's life as a quarterback, that he doesn't have to deal with this coming up down the future. All right, coming up next, the Giants are headed for another offensive line combo. We'll talk about that right after this. Hey, Giant fans, our partner at eBay Motors has teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Football host Vinny Iyer to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week, all season long, with players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. And Giant fans, if you're looking for a guaranteed receiver to fit on your championship roster, Vinny is recommending Atlanta's Drake London. London is starting to show why the Falcons drafted him first among the many talented receivers in the 2022 draft, and why he was a hot sleeper in 2023 fantasy drafts. London has found his groove in the offense with Desmond Ridder, and in the past 2 weeks, London has caught 15 of his 21 targets for 203 yards. He draws another good spot in Week 7 against the Buccaneers, who have struggled to contain the team's number one wide receivers. London is guaranteed to keep bringing the pleasing production with great matchups ahead of the Titans, Vikings, and Cardinals before a Week 11 bye. And Giant fans, while Vinny Iyer from Locked On Fantasy Football helps you win your fantasy championship, know that eBay Motors knows a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. And with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, roof racks, bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. So keep your ride or die alive at ebay.com/motors. eBay's Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only, and exclusions apply. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And on this segment, offensive line. We'll get you caught up on the latest with that unit. And I have some thoughts about kind of how that has played out this season. First off, for those of you who missed the news, on Monday, the team waived Jalen Mayfield, who they had signed on Saturday, last Saturday. They waived him. He has since been re-signed to the practice squad. The Giants have also signed off the Eagles practice squad Tyree Phillips, who of course was with them in the summertime, and they added Josh Miles, whom they signed off the Atlanta practice squad to the 53-man roster. Joshua Ezeudu goes to IR with the toe injury he suffered against Buffalo. Justin Pugh is on the practice squad. His rights reverted back to the practice squad. And a lot of you have asked me about La'el Collins. Nothing brewing there that I know of, at least not as of Tuesday night. He came in, he had his workout, and I suspect, I don't know this for a fact, but maybe he's still not ready to go, with that injury he's coming off of. Maybe he didn't look right or wasn't moving right. That would be my guess, but nothing brewing there, obviously, because the Giants have gone in another direction for now, at any rate, with offensive line. So we have these new faces, which means we're going to have a new combination, a new starting combination against the Commanders on Sunday. What's it going to look like? Well, as I mentioned, Joshua Ezeudu, who had been playing left tackle, on IR. I don't think it will be Justin Pugh at left tackle. Justin Pugh can man the position at guard. I think, if anything, if they bring him up, which I could see them doing, perhaps he is the left guard, and maybe Tyree Phillips tries left tackle. Center should be Ben Bredesen. Right guard, I suspect, will be Mark Lewinsky again. He stepped in for Marcus McKethan, who basically got benched. I think McKethan was also dealing with an injury too, but I think that was more along of a benching than anything. And then, of course, you have Evan Neal at right tackle. Now, folks, all these offensive line combinations, my goodness, how are they supposed to get continuity? How is this helping some of these younger players? All right. I think of Evan Neal, for example, who has played next to, McKethan, who is relatively inexperienced, who's now playing next to Glowinski, who has had his ups and downs. How are you supposed to stabilize your own performance? And yes, I know Evan Neal has his deficiencies. I'm not blind to that. But the point being is sometimes if you play next to a steady presence, that can help mitigate some of the issues that a player has. Over on the left side, Ezeudu has played next to Bredesen. He started next to, to Pugh, and he had his struggles. Glowinski was there for I think, a few snaps. Now you've got to mix it up. Tyree Phillips is coming in. He may need to play next to Pugh, who I don't believe he's ever played next to before. I mean, it's like musical chairs in that offensive line room. So how are these guys supposed to build, cohesiveness, communication, and just be effective? They can't. Now, a veteran like Justin Pugh, what we saw last week, did a nice job in terms of calming everything down, getting, everybody on the same page. You would think it would be the center that does that, but sometimes a veteran voice who's been there, done that, seen just about everything, even if he plays a different position than center, can be just as effective. So I personally would like to see Justin Pugh added to the 53-man roster. But I don't know necessarily if the Giants are going to be able to do that. And the reason why I say that is because Pugh is looking to get paid. All right. Uh, Joining the practice squad gives him an opportunity to put film out there for the rest of the league, because obviously the rest of the league can come in and sign him off the Giants practice squad if they so choose. Now, Pugh did put out a mixed bag on Sunday night, playing fairly well at left guard before moving to left tackle and having his share of struggles. So you got to think that, the Giants at best, they've got two more elevations they can use on Pugh. They'll probably use one this weekend, and Pugh will continue, go back to that left guard spot and continue to show that he's back from that ACL injury that is in the rearview mirror. Now, I talked about money. The Giants have $4.4 million in cap space, according to Over the Cap, which I don't believe has updated that total following the two signings that were made today. They should, those signings shouldn't cost them a whole lot. But the point being is the Giants don't have a whole lot of money to get through the rest of the year. So I don't know if, they say to themselves, okay, you know what? We like Pugh. We want to keep him for the long term, or at least for the next year or two. I don't know if they're going to be able to do it this year. So it's kind of a risk, but, for however long they have Pugh, and hopefully they will have him for the rest of the year, they'll just keep working him in as best as they can. Again, they have two more practice squad elevations before they have to move on and add him to the roster or risk exposing him to waivers. So I'm curious to see what happens there over the next couple of weeks if Justin Pugh remains a part of this offensive line, which, by the way, I do think he will be, because he played, like I said, he played well at guard, and he brought a sense of calmness to that offensive line that had been missing. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But the offensive line, still a mess. Let's just throw up our hands, folks. That offensive line just ain't getting fixed this year. It's that simple. All right, coming up next, should the Giants be sellers by the trade deadline, especially if they lose the next two games? Well, to that I say, what do you think, right? But we'll talk about it right after this. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Life can sometimes drag us down, leaving us with more questions than answers. Life-changing decisions and events can challenge our coping skills and call our confidence in making decisions into question. BetterHelp can provide you with the guidance you need to become empowered in your decision-making process. BetterHelp is entirely online and is designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. And if you find that your assigned therapist isn't a match for you, you can switch at any time for no additional charge. Let therapy be your map with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Hey, Giant fans, the Locked On Giants Insiders Club is where you get exclusive content delivered directly to your phone, such as private Q&A videos, obscure stats, and so much more. Plus, members can keep the conversation going about Big Blue with me in one-on-one conversations via text. Already, dozens of Giant fans have become part of this exclusive community, and I'd like to invite you to try it out as well. For more information or to register for your free, no-obligation 14-day trial, visit joinsubtext.com/LockedOnNYGiants. That's joinsubtext.com/LockedOnNYGiants. All right, everybody, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm Patricia Traina, and coming up tomorrow, we have the crossover edition of Locked On Giants, Locked On Commanders. David Harrison and I will break down the key storylines, the matchups. We'll give you predictions, everything you need to know to get you ready for Sunday's game, 1 o'clock. Thank you. 1 o'clock p.m. MetLife Stadium. So that should be a good one. Giants typically have held their own against the Commanders. We'll see if they can continue to do so. All right, in this segment, speaking of which, if the Giants lose to the Commanders and then they lose the following week against the Jets, should they be sellers or should they stand pat? Folks, I think you know the answer. This team is probably not going to the playoffs. All right. It's just really too far gone, I think. Even if they go on a little mini run and a mini winning streak, I find it really, I don't know that they make it to the playoffs. I'd be surprised. So that said, if you're Joe Shane and you're looking at this roster and you're saying, okay, we've got a foundation involved, we've got our core in place, but we got to start thinking about continuing this rebuilding process, because that's what they've been doing this year. Is they've been rebuilding. They were supposed to start the rebuild last year, which they did, but because they did so well, we kind of forgot that it was a rebuild. But in reality, the Giants are probably where they should be in terms of personnel and making decisions and whatnot, which is why, they didn't pay Saquon, which is why, they haven't done anything with Leonard Williams' contract or Dory Jackson's contract or Xavier McKinney's contract. So if you're the Giants, though, you only have 6 draft picks next year. You're not getting any comp picks. You would be kind of foolish, I think, if you didn't look to try and move some of these guys that maybe aren't in your long-term plans. And, some people look at that as just throwing in the towel on the current season and, okay, we're moving our best players or we're moving this player, we're giving up. I don't see it that way. I mean, a lot of people have asked me about, should the Giants tank to get, a quarterback next year? And I absolutely despise that question because no true competitor will ever tank. I mean, and if somebody is tanking, they should really think about getting out of the sport and doing something else, because that's just giving up. When you're, trading away guys, I don't see that quite the same as giving up. I see that as, recognizing where you are in your rebuild process and just pushing ahead to potentially, get better. I think coming in, a lot of people, and myself included, we were mesmerized by last year and the success the team had and thought, oh, this shouldn't be too hard. They got a better salary cap situation. They've got, more draft picks. They should be able to build and take things to the next level. When in reality, that was fool's gold. So here the Giants are, facing a crossroads of sorts. Now, if you're Joe Shane, obviously you're not going to give guys away for nothing. You want to get as good value as you can for guys who you might be looking to move. But to me, there's absolutely no question. Even if the Giants win these next 2 games, regardless of what they do against the Commanders and the Jets, I would consider moving a couple guys. And I did a show last week about potential trade targets, if you will. I mentioned Leonard Williams. I mentioned Adoree Jackson. Maybe even one of the receivers, Paris Campbell, who seems to be, they're trying to find a role for him. And I don't know that role is going to be on the offense moving forward. I think it's going to be on special teams. So look to move some of these guys who maybe aren't in your future and see if you can't get some additional draft capital so that come next April, when you're on the clock, you can manipulate a little bit, move up and down the board as need be, because that's how you're going to really get the guys you want if you're the Giants. And they still got a lot of work to do. They have a lot of needs that they need to fill out. The offensive line, obviously, adding some depth there. Edge rusher is another one. If they move on from Xavier McKinney, they might want to add another safety. They probably want to, continue adding to the cornerbacks. I mean, really, you could go up and down the roster and say that, there's room to add either via the draft or free agency. But, you only have so much to deal with in free agency, so much cap space. And the Giants for next year, as of right now, the Giants are scheduled to have, let me see, I think it's 37.852 million. If they can swing some of the trades of these bigger contracts, the Leonard Williams, the Adoree Jacksons, and I know that's a stretch, but if they could get rid of some of those contracts, they can add to that pot that they have next year, which will give them more flexibility to do things in, the offseason and free agency. And of course, to accommodate a draft class, which right now it's looking like they're going to be in the top 10 in the draft class. So they're going to need a little bit more money. Now, here's the other thing to keep in mind, which I thought, a lot of people aren't talking about, which I thought Joe Schoen was kind of smart to do. When you look at the guys who are not under contract for next year, I mentioned a few, and I don't think these guys will be back, but Leonard Williams, Adoree Jackson, they have voidable years in their contracts. So like I said, try to get rid of them. Mark Lewinsky, I don't think will be back next year. Tyrod Taylor has a voidable year. He may or may not be back. The Giants, though, took care of Dexter Lawrence a year early, because they did have him under contract this year on his rookie option year. They took care of Andrew Thomas early. So really, you look at next year, who do the Giants have that they absolutely have to break the bank open for? Can you make an argument for Saquon Barkley? Perhaps, but that's one guy. You should be able to get his cap number low if you can work out a deal with him. But who else? Who else on the roster do they really have that you say they got to re-sign this guy? Xavier McKinney, I mean, you might want him back, but are you going to break the bank open for him? Probably not, given how he's played thus far. Tyrod Taylor, are you going to look to extend him? Possibly, but he shouldn't break the bank either. There's really nobody, Graham Gano, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Gano, they've extended. Yep, they did. So there's really nobody on this roster other than Saquon that you can make a case for that you absolutely have to break open the bank. So you can use some of that money next year from that pot to add via free agency. And if you can get additional draft picks, even better. So now you can take the rebuild even further and bring this team closer to being the team that you envisioned. So I think that's kind of where the Giants are headed. I do think they will be sellers before the deadline. I don't know that they'll make a ton of trades, but I could see them making at least one, possibly two, and just continue to rebuild, because this team, this is still in the midst of a rebuild. And in retrospect, those of us, and again, I include myself in this, who anticipated this team would be taking the next step, we were mistaken, because if you go back, the signs were there all along that this team was just getting started in its rebuild and that it's still got a long way to go. All right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for me on this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. Don't forget, tomorrow, Crossover Thursday, David Harrison of Locked On Commanders and I give you everything you need to know ahead of the Giants-Commanders game. We hope to see you then. Thank you for making us your first listener of the day, or if watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day, and we'll see you tomorrow.